People trust their eyes above all else, but most people see what they wish to see, or what they believe they should see, not what is really there. The purpose of government should be to serve the people, and in such a position, they don't need to keep secrets. They need to share what they're doing with the people so we can decide whether we want them to do the things that they're doing. And a lot of people don't realize what this is doing, what this whole transfer of life skills into a virtual world means, and what it's doing to us, what it's really doing to human consciousness, what it's doing to the whole human experience. And even what sort of an effect it's going to have on history is an interesting thing to look at as well. When you look at this society, if you can see this society as being in a state of decline, a state of collapse, and in many ways I think it is. I don't know if there's going to be any way we can even pull ourselves out of that, as positive as I want to be about it. I just see it happening, and I don't know whether it's actually reversible. But when people look back on this time in history and they look for information about what happened, it's going to be very difficult for them to find any, because there weren't too many people who actually wrote anything down. We may have written it down on our keyboards and put it up there in the virtual world, but none of it was real. None of it exists in the real world. I mean, all the radio shows that I do, these only exist in the virtual world. They won't be there for people in the future to hear. None of the writings that I write will be around for people to read, because they only exist in the virtual world. All the films I make, none of this stuff is real. None of the stuff that we do online is actually here in the real world. And all the stuff we think we might be leaving behind for future generations, we're actually not. We're just putting it all into a virtual world, and the virtual world is basically taking this information from us, and it's putting us in a position where all they have to do is flick the power off, and suddenly everything we've created all disappears. And that's an interesting thing to look at. We don't write scrolls or books or anything like that. Perhaps that's why the people in the old days used to actually carve things in stone, because they knew that was the only way it was going to be preserved. I mean, even if we wrote it down in books, how long are the books going to last anyway? It's an interesting way to look at the world. When you really see how much we are having our life skills and our knowledge taken from us and transferred into a virtual world, it really does give one pause to question the motives behind all this and where we're really being led with all this. Really, what is destroying this civilization and what is creating this huge hole, this huge gap that is going to be there in the historical narrative for future generations, because it is, folks, just going to be a huge hole in history when people are trying to figure out this time. We look at that and we realize it's because of apathy. It's because we just thought we had it made. We just thought everything was great. We could do all this stuff in the virtual world, and all this virtual stuff that we do, we thought that it actually meant something. As I've often said, humanity is being set up. We're being pushed into these cities, we're being moved into these massive concentrated areas of population. We're being trained to be completely dependent upon a system which only supplies our needs for 3 days. Any supermarket you go to, these shelves only have 3 days worth of food on them. And then the trucks come and they restock the shelves. And all the people within the cities are removed of any form of responsibility for themselves, any form of life skills. They become completely dependent upon a system, and they become completely dependent upon the internet and the virtual world for all the knowledge that they have. So what happens when you take it away? What happens when you turn the power off and the trucks stop coming to the supermarkets and filling the shelves? And what happens to these people? I mean, none of them have any real life skills anymore. Not many of them even have the most basic understanding of what it means to be human. They may have higher education, but they don't know how to go and dig a garden or plant a tree or go fishing or catch their food or grow their food or whatever it is they eat. I mean, they don't know how to do any of this other basic stuff. They might be great with letters or numbers or something, but what does that mean as a human being? What does any of this stuff we do mean as a human being? You look at the state that this civilization is in, and then you look at the technology that we are finding in relation to Tartaria, and you ask yourself how they fell, why they disappeared. And I would suggest we are seeing a practical example of how they disappeared unfolding right before our eyes in the world today. We're being set up. And really, the more you step back and look at it and consider that to be a possibility, the more it becomes obvious and the more it makes an awful lot of sense. And a lot of people can see this. I mean, a lot of people can see that there's something terribly wrong. They can see that we're being set up. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of people who notice the things that I notice. But in the overall scheme of things, in the overall human condition, even with these realizations coming to people, and even with people seeing the problems that we have, they still look for saviors from an external source. They still wait for someone to come along to lead them to safety. What's that going to do if we have a lawsuit and we change the present system, we change the present government? Well, what do? We put another government in place and we find ourselves in the same position. I mean, none of these things are the way out, folks. I mean, what lawsuit? What do you even want to launch a lawsuit for? You're launching a fictional lawsuit against a fictional system. I mean, the whole thing's fiction, folks. Nothing in it has anything to do with being human. But you see this everywhere. You see people saying, yes, I'm the knight on the white charger. I'm going to lead us all to safety. Just sit back, don't do anything, and follow me. You have people within the independent media saying, yeah, I'm taking on the deep state. I'm going to launch a lawsuit against these people. And the people out there in YouTube land and the people out there in the world watch all this stuff and they sit there and they eat popcorn and they wait for some big change to happen, but it never comes. Yeah, but it's like they're watching a TV show. You know, it's what I call the spy novel version of reality. People are just waiting for the next chapter, and they sit there and they watch and they wait and they get all excited and they think something's going to happen. And no matter how much it never does, they still don't do anything themselves. They just sit there waiting and watching and waiting and watching and waiting for something to happen. But it just never does. And while they're waiting for it, all of this smart grid is rolling out around us, you know, and by the time people notice the smart grid, it's going to be too late. So that's what it's about, folks. It's about the truth. It's not about all of this speculation and conjecture. It doesn't matter what anybody thinks. It matters what the truth is and how we can use the truth to our advantage to establish some freedom in the world, and that's what it's about. You know, and really that's what we should be focusing on rather than getting caught up in the details and arguing over details that we can't prove either way about all of these things. You know, we don't look at the bigger picture. We don't look at how the legislation will be used, and we don't direct our energy towards the liars that are running this system and simply disconnect from it. You're not going to help by launching lawsuits against the government. The government's a fiction. It's just an idea. Pull your support from it. Stay home for a day. Imagine if the whole world stayed home for a day and didn't spend any money. I've been saying this for 10 years on the radio show, folks, calling for a day of non-compliance where the whole world just disconnects for a day and see what happens. Now, once people did that, I mean, it'd send a shockwave around the world and it would also inspire them to maybe want to do it for more than a day. You know, this is how we can make a difference, folks. There's not going to be any leaders come along. You know, we can make a difference by changing our perspective ourselves and disconnecting from this system. And as I said, one of the big problems is that people can't see the way out because they're waiting for someone to lead them to safety. They can't see that the way out is within themselves. Because it doesn't matter what anybody leads you to. It doesn't matter what sort of a system comes along. It doesn't matter which president comes online. It doesn't matter which government is replaced by whichever government takes their place. If we haven't changed what's in our hearts and we haven't changed our moral compass, then we'll simply end up back where we are now. And that's the problem. People want to sit inside and just look at the situation in the world and stay undercover and hope it all goes away and wait for the newsletter that tells them that it's safe to go outside now. It doesn't work like that, folks. You know, it'll never be safe to go outside until we change our moral compass. And if we change our moral compass and we refuse to comply with anything which causes us to step outside our moral compass, then we don't need a new system. We don't need a Venus project. We don't need an Ubuntu. We don't need anything. All we need is for us to start acting within our moral compass. And if we do that, then the system that is here already will change around us because it won't have any other choice but to do so. Now, the only reason the system exists in its current form today is because we comply with it. We step outside our moral compass in order to abide by legislation which doesn't serve us or anybody else. You know, and that's the problem. That's the whole thing, folks. And if we haven't changed what's in our hearts, it doesn't matter what system comes along. We'll just end up back the way we are, and that's the way it will work. And people want change, but they don't want to change, and they can't see that it doesn't matter what we create. It has to come from within, and then we don't have to create anything external. It will come about by its own accord, simply because we've changed our perspective of how we look at things and how we interact with things. That's why all this fighting and argument and all this irrelevant stuff, it's just completely irrelevant. I've been so frustrated with this whole Christchurch thing over people arguing over the details and so desperately wanting to be right and claiming that it's fake and all this sort of stuff. I mean, and I don't want it to be right either way. I don't care what it is either way. I just want the real evidence to reveal itself so we can use the real evidence to bring this system down, because there's a lot of really good evidence in the video that has revealed itself. But you can't get any focus on it because people want to argue over all these speculative details and nobody can prove either way, which will tie us up in infighting for the next 20 years, and meanwhile this whole smart grid just continues to roll out. That's the problem, folks. All the stuff that's going on underneath the surface while we're not looking. You know, we're arguing over details that we think are important, but they're not. What this is all about is freedom. You know, that's what it's about, and that's what it's always been about, and anything that gets in the way of that is simply a distraction. You know, anything that removes that focus, it's just a distraction, folks. It shouldn't be there, and it deserves no real attention. I mean, let's establish some freedom, and then we can figure out what's going on. We won't have to argue about it, then we'll actually be free to find out. Won't that be novel?